Hi, I'm James McGuire, and today we're talking about cloud computing in the year 2021. We're making big, bold predictions and forecasts about what's going to be happening in cloud in the year ahead. To discuss that, I'm joined by three people who know a lot about the topic. With me is Michael LeBeau, Senior Advisor to the C-Suite and overall cloud guru. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Great to be here, James. I love it. You know, I mean, I want to see how much we can get wrong for 2020.
Exactly. We got to meet a year from now and go, oh, we were really wrong about that. Also with me is Jim Ryan, CEO at Flexera. Hello to you, Jim.
James, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Good, good. And rounding out our panel is Sam Ramji, Chief Strategy Officer at DataStax. Hello to you, Sam.
James, it's great to see you, and good to chat with you both, Jim and Michael.
And Sam, you're not even the assistant strategy officer. You're actually the chief strategy officer.
Yeah, so it's an unusual title for a startup, but we have about 500 people in the company, and a lot of what we've had to do is look at how is the world changing and how do we fit our model to that. What is data like? So, yeah, there's a lot of strategy to be done.
Excellent. So there's a lot of possible predictions we could talk about. I want to get to them, but I'd like to get the single most highest conviction prediction that the three of you have for cloud in the year ahead. What do you think is going to happen that's really important? Do you think it's definitely going to happen and really going to have an effect on people? Michael, what would you think? What do you think one thing that is definitely going to happen in the world of cloud in the year 2021?
So I want to hit the non-technical aspect because I really do think that given what we've experienced in 2020, that in 2021, we're going to see an acceleration on the business side of the house in terms of driving the level of expectation from the technology and from the business, to take advantage. So we've seen significant acceleration in 2020 due to COVID. I think the taste of what that means to the business, particularly given whatever uncertainty around economics, social issues, whatever. I mean, we've got a large number of trends all impacting things at the same time. The business side is going to take a very active role in driving the next level of transformation.
You don't mean cost cutting. You mean the business side is going to lobby for greater technology, or what will the business side be driving?
I think we've seen acceleration in digital transformation, and I think that the business, the CEO in particular, needs to step up and articulate the moonshot. Whatever that moonshot is for that organization, whatever ambition, I think they need to step up to it. I think they need to be the forcing function because we're seeing too much churn or a lot of churn in like the Fortune 500, and I think if you don't, it's do or die. So step up to the plate, set that ambitious agenda. And the reason I'm saying this is because the more ambitious the agenda, the fact of the matter remains, the only path is cloud.
Right,
so
right.
if you need to do things with speed and scale, and there's lots of, the number of the case evidence of organizations successfully leveraging cloud for their business has grown to a critical mass, so that every industry, every region, you can point to something that somebody did with speed and with scale, and that's the essence of cloud.
Jim, he mentioned the CEO stepping up. I mean, what is your prediction, and will you be stepping up in the year 2021? Maybe you've already stepped up, but what is your prediction for the coming year?
Hey man, I'm stepping up all the time. That's a full-time job of a CEO, right?
All right, good. They expect you to step up.
So I think it's direct. I think Michael's bang on here, and at the risk of being somewhat controversial, it's maybe the hype around cloud just abates and ceases. It's not magic here. Right? The only reason you go to cloud is to achieve a business outcome and get something of benefit for the business. And I think too many CEOs have been, delegating some of those decisions to the technologists within the company. And I understand why. But just because it's cloud doesn't make it the land of milk and honey and all your dreams will come true. This is just your stuff running on somebody else's kit. And let's not make it something larger than it is. It's a means to an end. It is not the end in and of itself. You know, and I think I would hope that now that, you know, approximately 50% of the workloads or thereabout are now running in the cloud, people have digested what it is and what it entails, and you know, aren't treating it as something so special. They're treating it like the rest of their IT estate.
Mm-hmm. Sam, I agree with that cloud is going to cease to be special in the year ahead, or what do you see if you're going to look ahead?
I agree with that, and that is why my high confidence prediction is that 2021 will be the year of multi-cloud.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean,
But to be
it
specific,
already is happening, right?
it is, right? Andy Jassy came out and started talking about multi-cloud. I mean, right,
Which is a switch from AWS, because they like to be the sole dog.
right. That's kind of the whole AWS worldview, right? What do you mean there are other clouds? We don't understand.
Right.
But when they start acknowledging that, what's that reflecting? It's reflecting the reality of CIOs who are trying to figure out, what do I do, right? There's been this COVID acceleration. There's been a lot of M&A. We're actually seeing the Fortune 500 are sitting on the largest dry powder war chest in human history. The top companies in the first 6 months of COVID took out $800 billion in debt,
Mm-hmm.
which they mostly haven't spent in order to restructure their corporations and fix their assets, right? So they could figure out how you make payroll, what do you do with your facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So that is going to unleash, we're already starting to see an acquisitive wave of buying other companies, whether they're companies in their industry, whether they're tech pure plays, to try to figure out how to accelerate. So multi-cloud has gotten here mostly by accident. People haven't been doing a lot of intentional multi-cloud. It's multinationals. This company was built on AWS, got acquired by a company that was built on Azure, right? Now you got two clouds. That's the simplest stance.
Right.
But now, right? I mean, look at what Jim's company does, right? They help you figure out how do you spend less to get more, right? Look at what Michael's advising folks on. You start to realize, wow, the best way to get a discount from my cloud vendor is to tell them I'm also on another cloud.
Right.
If you
Right.
don't have a reasonable way to escape, they will not give you a good price. And I learned this myself firsthand a year ago when I was CIO, CTO for cloud platform for Autodesk before I came to DataStax. So multi-cloud on purpose, once you see that line item of your AWS bill cross $50 million and your CFO is like, hey, so I see your compound annual growth rate on the AWS bill is like 30%. So like, when does this become material? And should we be talking to the board about this? Like, how do we prepare that? That's when you get told, you know, consider other options. You need a multi-cloud strategy. And building on that, Kubernetes is taking over the world. Like, I had the privilege to be working on and with the Kubernetes team when I was VP of product management at Google. Mm-hmm. We had no idea how fast it would grow, but Kubernetes is just breaking out everywhere. And what that really is a signal of a technical capability to have a common operational stance on multiple clouds. Because now Google and Amazon and Microsoft all have their own native Kubernetes services, which are really good. So you can be multi-cloud on purpose. You can have a good way of managing the costs, and you can have a good way of managing the artifacts and the assets, right? So I think that's going to become mainstream in 2021.
It seems like one of the challenges with multi-cloud is that mythical pane of glass that enables some poor company to really manage all those clouds. And there's going to be different cost structures and different technologies that each cloud can offer within reason. I mean, will we ever get to that mythical pane of glass that enables someone to really manage multiple clouds from one platform, or does it somehow exist? I mean, Jim, you heard anything about that? Be able to manage multiple clouds from one pane of glass? What is your take on multi-cloud in 2021?
Well, I think multi-cloud will continue to increase and increase for all the reasons that Sam just mentioned. Thanks for the shout out on Flexera, Sam. But hey, I mean, it's, you know, nothing good lasts forever. And when you talk to any CIO or CEO, one of the single fastest growing line items on his or her own budget year on, year out for the last couple of years has been AWS. It's outpacing all other growth on the P&L. That is not sustainable. And so people are looking for options, and that will continue to drive people towards multi-cloud. And I think that even the large providers themselves are coming to grips with the fact that it's going to be a multi-cloud environment. And one of the key advantages they'll have is, how can I break down some of these barriers to working with one another here? So we think it's absolutely moving in that direction. We think that the technology will be an enabler to making that happen. I don't think there's going to be a cure-all, but we absolutely see that as being a reality.
What about if I think about my own prediction for cloud in 2021, companies are going to suddenly start asking every cloud provider, what can you do for me in terms of ML and artificial intelligence? Because all the three leaders have those products, they offer them, and so and companies are feeling really desperate. We need to get on board with artificial intelligence. We need to do more. Michael, do you hear that at all, or am I just making that up?
No, I don't think you're making it up. I think
I do make stuff up sometimes, but just so
no,
we're clear on that.
It's natural for the IT industry to make stuff up. So,
right.
Listen, I think that there's a number of levers in terms of generating value from cloud. Some of them, involve modernization or rejuvenating what you do have today, what you're running today. But the big value really, I think, that's generated is off of innovation. And when you think about, not the newest technologies, but the new technologies around advanced analytics, machine learning, AI, IoT, edge, these are the things that I think, organizations have experimented with. Some organizations have been able to leverage these cloud provider tools and really accelerated product development and delivered value quickly. I mean, we're talking in the matter of weeks, perhaps months. And so these new offerings, and it's not just one thing. It's not just, AI. It's the combination of these things together that create the value. And so the better you're able to leverage a cloud platform, these resident tools, the innovation that's coming from these different providers, and apply that into your own kind of business challenge and do it in record time. That's the point. And so there are many examples of organizations being able to do that. And I would say that the bulk of the use cases that are out there, leverage these new technologies in some new fashion. And underpinning that is that there's tremendous latent demand from the business side of the house for things that they want to do, but have been told no. There's no budget, whatever. Because when you think about how IT runs today, the majority of the budget is against, things, legacy, tech debt, whatever, paying, just paying the interest on that, and not on new. And so we need to have that reckoning. We need to drive, more funding towards, these new capabilities. And that's the exciting part of where I think we're going in 2021.
Cool. All right. So if you look around at what the various cloud pundits are saying, they're saying a collection of things. And I'd like to get the three of yours take on just a number of possible things that people have said about what's going to be happening in cloud in 2021. I'll very quickly read through them. Sam, I'll ask you for a comment on one of them. Any of these could be true or false, or some variation thereof. I hear people say that 2021 will be the year of cloud native. I hear that edge computing will be the new cloud as edge gains adoption and cloud becomes merely business as usual foundational. I've certainly heard that the multi-cloud will dissolve the barrier between cloud providers. We've talked about that a little bit. Hybrid and on-premise grow in popularity. You never know. That's, and then winners and losers in the cloud world in 2021. Sam, any of those stand out to you like, oh my God, yes, that is going to happen, or oh goodness, please don't pay no attention to that?
They all sound like pretty good bets, except for this multi-cloud will dissolve the barrier between cloud providers, right? Okay. So going mainstream doesn't mean the barriers go away. And I think this is a kind of a good segue from Michael LeBeau's comment on artificial intelligence. I had the opportunity to attend JP Morgan Chase's Technology Innovation Conference about 6 weeks ago. Jamie Dimon held the keynote, and he told us all that the direction he was giving his business people was focus on AI. He said, because if you get something right in the business with AI, you won't get a 10% improvement. You'll get a 10x improvement.
Great.
So go figure out what your AI workloads need to be, right? And kind of drive in there. Cool. So how do you do that? Well, one of the first products that shipped when I was at Google was the TPU, the tensor processing unit, right? So this is super high end, very fast, good price performance way to run TensorFlow, which is a very popular AI framework. But that said, it's a little bit of a vertical integration strategy because you're going to be doing this high end processing on data that's got to be in your cloud. So you're uploading, terabytes of data so that you can let your ML people and the processes go crazy on it and find some new correlation, some feature in the data that lets you convert your customers at a higher rate, lets you predict churn, lets you do supply chain optimization that you couldn't imagine before. But then that's all kind of very cloud specific. You may end up going, well, the reason I use Google is for my AI workloads. The reason I use Amazon is for my line of business apps, and I use Microsoft for all of my sort of most secure workloads because I've got all of my Active Directory, policy, everything's locked up, and maybe stuff that I want to see analyzed in Office 365. Right, so you're going to use them differently on purpose with some crossover. So the control plane is unlikely to be common between cloud providers. You'll have multiple cloud stances. So what I would say, you should look at what happens to New Relic, what happens to Splunk, what happens to the main management companies as the opportunity to fight for that pane of glass shows up. You'll get a lot of telemetry based on their performance, and you'll look at a technology called Prometheus, which is the monitoring and logging engine that is native to Kubernetes, which is cloud native. So I think 2021 being the year cloud native, super, super safe bet. The idea that multi-cloud means that you can turn all the clouds into one giant computer. It's not going to happen because the competition between the cloud providers is going to make them create breaking changes that won't let you kind of have those common environments. It's like Mac and Windows.
So that mythical pane of glass may never exist, or at least for the foreseeable future, that would enable you to really manage the 3 or 4 or 5 of them as one. That's not in the near term or midterm future.
It's not in the next 12 months for enterprises that have complex systems, right? But 3 years from now, 5 years from now, almost certainly something like that's going to exist.
What about that one? Hybrid and on-premise grow in popularity. Wait a second, on-premise grows in popularity? I spit out my coffee on that one. I mean, Jim, is that working for you? Is on-premise like the rise of the data center? That's what I want to see, that headline, the rise of the data center in 2021. Are you buying that?
It's counterintuitive, absolutely, positively. Now, popularity doesn't mean there's going to be an influx of spend.
Right.
What we see are people are finally waking up. You're not appointed the CIO of cloud, right? If you're managing an enterprise and your job is the chief information officer, you don't get the luxury to just care about and manage your cloud. So again, if we've established that half of your app stack is still on-prem and or some combination of on-prem and SaaS, guess what? You can't ignore the on-prem just because it's not sexy and hyped up here.
Right.
And when you look at the totality of your budget, and if you want to be treated like a business person to, helping contribute to the P&L and the bottom line here, you're going to have to become much more attuned as to the interplay between applications and services in an on-prem, a SaaS, and a cloud, where I'll give you an overly simplistic example. Right? When for a relatively complicated organization, they're going to have one contract with Oracle, one contract with IBM, and one contract with Microsoft. Typically, those contracts in the aggregate are going to be in excess of tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars per annum. Now, when they audit you, or you're having an ELA discussion, they don't come and say, what are you doing just spending on your cloud? They're going to audit you one time, and they're going to want you to report out on everything that you're doing across all those disparate hybrid platforms. And you're not going to be able to get away with one tool for cloud, one for your SaaS, one for on-prem. You're going to have to go and look at it, because like it or not, it's still 50% of your legacy. And that's probably the hardest, more expensive lift and shift process to move over. So, again, I'm not suggesting that people are going to go off of cloud to on-prem, but I think people are finally waking up. It's not a separate, distinct thing. It's part of your overall portfolio. And as a C-level exec, you're going to have to manage that whole thing.
You can actually see some hints that everybody else believes that too. So look at Google Cloud Platform and Anthos. It's an on-premises software product from a cloud provider, and look what happened. AWS copied them, right? Now you've got EC2 everywhere, right? Or so you've got a bunch of these capabilities that are showing you where the market's going, and then VMware's Tanzu business is growing really well. So there's this rise of on-prem. It also kind of brings in the question of who owns your edge. Are you renting an edge? Is an edge count against the cloud provider? Mostly what I'm seeing is edge is on premises. Now it might be, it might be the middle of the country, right? It might not be your typical location, but you're trying to do factory automation. You're trying to put an edge close to your big box store so that you can do a lot more local processing. Curbside delivery, turns out, takes a lot of AI. So it'd be nice to be able to have some of that be, edge computing based. That's probably going to show up as on-premises spending as well.
Michael, you're big on the on-prem thing. It's pretty cool, actually. Going towards 2025, on-prem is cool.
Yeah, I'm not going to be quoted as saying that. I think there are various use cases across the enterprise. I think that it's a generalized outflow, not an inflow. But I do think that the cloud providers and customers do have various challenges. They can't exit all at once. These are struggles, where it makes sense in terms of that balance. It's not all in one or all in the other, maybe. I think for a lot of use cases, it is going to skew that way. I think with the local zones that Amazon announced and whatnot, the type of scale and build out that we're seeing, we're going to see a different definition emerge. And so,
sorry, definition of what? Just so I'm clear.
Well, I mean, hybrid on-prem. What you're seeing, with Outposts is more like a public cloud in approach than Tanzu data center out. And I think, there's going to be kind of an interesting, I wouldn't say war, but it's going to be an interesting, situation where, different parties are arguing for different perspectives within the vendor community as well as within clients in terms of how to approach it. And some of it will be relating to skill sets, tooling, processes. Other will relate to the business outcome that you're trying to generate and the speed that you're trying to do it at. And so, where it makes sense, depending on the level of innovation that's being applied, what the orientation, who wins. And I think so we're going to see a lot of friction and discussion around this in the coming year. The products, that Sam mentioned, are just starting to ramp up. They were only introduced a little over a year ago. And so, those use cases, I think, are still getting explored. And the economics tied around them, will be more and more fleshed out over time. And so 2021 might see some real production in terms of that. I want to just hark back on, I wrote a paper on MultiCloud a couple of years ago. It's never going to be a single pane of glass in my view, just given the level of churn. But what Sam mentioned is the right way to think about it in my view. Control plane. You need a control plane. And what that means is that you need an operations architecture and an operating model that support the fact that, across your enterprise, you're using, multiple providers, legacy and cloud. You're using a multitude of tools, and you have, data, particularly operations data, all over the place, and not one single version of the truth. And I think that's going to be a big challenge for organizations in order to understand what's actually going on.
And that could lead possibly to cost problems without that ability to understand what's going on.
Yeah, I agree with Michael.
Yeah.
I think the underlying data architecture and data model fueling all of this is a big challenge and problem for people to get their head around, especially their cost model. It's, unless you can normalize and get a consistent view of what actually exists out there, it's really hard to take action to improve things and get your cost in control.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to do. Like when in my last job, I had a dedicated finance team of 5 people who would work with the operators to figure out what we were spending where. And because any reasonably sized enterprise has a platform team that's almost like a mini internal AWS, even if it's still, sending workloads out to AWS, that's multiplexed across, a dozen, 24 lines of business. Do you know which line of business is spending, is generating what spend that's flowing through the platform team? Often you don't. So that's kind of a tricky component of all of this. I spend a lot of time focusing on data, and I think there's a huge change in how we use data, going back to Jamie Dimon's quote and the focus on AI giving you 10x improvements in different areas of business. We are going from an era of app-driven data, right, to data-driven apps. App-driven data privileges the app. It focuses on app velocity, and it kind of isolates data in a silo at the bottom of a microservice. This is my Postgres. This is my MySQL, whatever. Your microservice team is kind of the sole owners of how to access that. Now, what happens when the business team is like, hey, I've got these new data scientists. I got a consultant from McKinsey. This is going to be amazing. And they're like, yeah, it's going to take us like 3 months. We got to delay the other application team, and then they'll like poke holes, and it's a mess, right? So going to data-driven apps, which is what AI is, requires a rethinking of your data architecture. And so that's what I've seen firsthand in the last 9 months, a big shift that's inspired by COVID to say we got to move faster. What's the blocker to velocity? Well, one is Michael's point from the beginning. Just expect it can go faster and get your executives out of the way, let the team get their work done. But then the next blocker they come into is, how do I get the data to make this new experience amazing?
And what is there an answer to that? A nutshell answer to that? How do I get the data?
This is the underlying transformation that IT is going through now, is to figure out how do you become a data-driven enterprise. And so it is a scale of transformation that we've seen in the last decade around compute or application orientation, and focusing on making data a first-class citizen. So you have to say, what's my data architecture? What are the different groups involved? How is my data platform team operating, or do I not have one? So it's going to be a tremendous amount of work over the next 3 to 5 years as companies adopt data as an architecture. But 1 year ago, there's an amazing podcast that Mark Andreessen did on the A16Z podcast, where he offered his point of view, right? The A16Z thesis, which is AI is not an app, AI is not a feature, AI is an architecture. And what that pulls on is the data architecture has to be right. There's some amazing work being done by a technology director at ThoughtWorks named Zhamak Dehghani, and she's laid out a point of view of a data mesh. I strongly encourage anybody who's paying attention to this, thinking about transformational data, to go take a look at her work on data meshes.
Yeah.
Bringing together the operational plane and the analytical plane in a way that lets you be a lot smarter.
Getting back to our little pundits possibilities, that bottom one there, winners and losers in the cloud world in 2021. Is there a faction, a group, or an organization, or a thought that it might be a loser? Let's just say that might fade away a little bit more in 2021, not be as big. Jim, you have a sense of that? Who might be either a fader away or a quote unquote a loser in 2021?
A loser?
Well, we're not. That word is not diplomatic. We don't.
Somebody that's not winning as much or ever.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Not winning as much. Not a loser, but not winning as much in the year 2021 in the world of cloud.
Yeah, I'll shy away from organizations or things
Sure.
like that, and just focus on the type of people.
Name names.
Who's that, Michael?
I was going to say name. I want to put.
Name names. Sure. Yeah. Companies. Yeah. Let's get ourselves sued here. Yeah. Sure.
Let's just talk about our peers, right? We're all professionals. We're all knowledge workers. By and large, we're part of the rarefied air that are the jobs of the future and are eating the world, right?
As Mark Andreessen said, right?
Yeah, well, if software is eating the world, cloud is eating software, and I don't know what's going to eat cloud. But
Right.
I think the losers are people that continue to just make this about the flux capacitors and the bits and bytes and feeds and speeds and only the tech stack. I think if that's your chosen worldview as it relates to all thing cloud, you'll be resigned to being the staff engineer, which may be fine. But for those professionals that are aspiring to get up into the C-suite and actually run companies and do great things, lead organizations, you've got to get past the feeds and speeds here. In 1964, I believe it was 64, IBM had the 360 architecture. That was centralized computing. Then we had client server. Then we had desktops and everything else. And this is just the same old story kind of repeating itself every 5 to 10 years now. And at the end of the day, you've got a business to run, a problem to solve, and the losers are the people that continue to make this just about the technology. The winners are the ones that can be the Rosetta Stone and understand the technology and be able to articulate how you get to your chosen business outcome by leveraging said technology.
Definitely. Yeah, I heard about this AI specialist recently. This individual is making actually $1 million a year as an AI specialist, but I asked about what he's doing, and it is a he in this case. And he turns out he's got all sorts of like people expertise and business expertise in addition to the AI engineering expertise. So that really made him worth the cool $1 million a year.
I'm
Michael,
not trying to disparage anybody that's just into the feeds and speeds or
right.
devour that. There's a need there, but at the end of the day, a lot of people want to. I talk to a lot of people. They want my job. They want to be a C-level. Well, you've got to make that transition, that mental transition.
Michael, your winners or a loser in cloud in 2021.
So, I started off by saying there's a lot of value at stake, tremendous amount of value at stake, whether you're, cloud or not. And so when you think about lists, like Fortune 500, there are 500 companies. And I look back at this and the difference between the companies that were listed in 2000, the companies that are listed in 2020, only 38% remain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so if you were to fast forward to, 10 years from now, my bet is, of the companies that are on the list today, only 50% or less, will still be there. And so it's not like the overall market is going to swell by that much, but what that means is that there's a ton of value that's up for grabs. And so if you're not in cloud, if you're not leveraging AI and advanced analytics and machine learning and IoT or whatever other term you like, if you're not really leveraging these capabilities, then you're going to lose. It's not just about revenue and cost efficiency. It's really about whether or not your company's viable. And I think that, if that doesn't scare the crap out of you, I don't know what would.
Right.
And so, so then the question becomes how. So it's not worth naming names because they're in high tech and they're in banking, they're in retail, they're in every industry. And so, that value is going to change hands. It's going to gravitate one way or the other. And are you getting your fair share of growth? Are you winning, in that regard? And I think that's what we're talking about. And so those will be the winners, the ones who really leverage this stuff for full advantage, for unfair advantage.
There you go. All right, well, let's forget what the pundit said. Let's look ahead to the future, cloud in the year 2025 or in the years ahead, let's put it this way. Sam, what do you see when you think about the future of cloud, not just next year, but a few years down the road?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe most importantly, how can companies prepare for that future? What is your sense of that?
I see clearly AI-driven enterprise becoming the thing that we talk about. Like today, we're still trying to get to data-driven enterprise, right? And AI-driven enterprise will be pretty clear. Even today, some of the winners like Lowe's, they have a chief AI officer. Think about that, right? So that you'll see a lot more of those standard titles, right? The shape of the C-suite will shift in 2025. I think second, you'll see containerization of data. We've got containerization of compute. right? We can flow compute cycles wherever we want them to be. Even in the process of producing an app, you have containers as part of your lean manufacturing sort of inspired flow. But the data hasn't come along. In 2025, you'll have a completely fluid environment where you can imagine containerization of data so that you'll be able to differentiate between the data you're using in development and test and in production. And then finally, you'll have this really strong AI-driven cycle between either your on-premises workloads and your cloud workloads. You'll understand, am I using the cloud to train a model? How is my data science team and my application development team will be working well together, and they'll be trading these assets through the cloud. So when you think about differences in phases of building AI capabilities, by far the most intensive is the training phase. And so if you could grab 20,000 machines just for the training phase, you might be able to get your model built in 5 hours instead of 5 days. So that's a really important moment where you want to be able to burst. And then once you've got your trained model, you want to be able to send those back to the application teams and have those move. So it's all about basically consolidation of the artifacts. If we can have a container concept for each of the things that we care about, whether it's a model or data or our app, then we'll see a lot more fluidity of which clouds we're providing, we're using to provide support, and how we're scaling to support the business, because the business will always have to drive, and their demands will vary based on day, based on month, based on season.
How does the idea of needing a container for data in the future jibe with the idea of us moving into streaming analytics, where analytics is going to go faster? It's real time now, but it'll become streaming even faster than what is now called real time, where data flow is so fluid, it hardly sits in a container at any point. Am I missing something? We've talked with Simon Crosby, he's related to streaming analytics. How does Simon's world jibe with the world of containers full of data?
It's about sort of consistency, addressability, fluidity. Where can I know that this thing's going to work? So being able to do your test workloads, be able to replay, be able to pass audits, right? One of the things that will become shockingly clear is your ability to pass audit, deal with regulatory compliance in an AI-driven enterprise will be based on your ability to prove why the AI made the decision it did. To do that, you're going to have to replay this information. So yes, you're going to have real-time and streaming capabilities, but you're going to want to be able to play that back. You're going to want to address the data that you were using at the time. What's that unit, right? There's no standard container for data today, but to be able to index and address that data in a way that makes it more like what you're deploying on Kubernetes will make the entire system more tractable.
Jim, what do you see when you look at the future of cloud, not just next year, but a few years down the road? What's going to be big, and how can companies get ready for it?
I think the biggest thing that we look at, and I see a lot of other tech CEOs looking at it, is really, if you fast forward 5 years, ironically, it's 2026, and resources are already scarce. Finding people that can actually help solve these problems is already very expensive and difficult to find that talent. In 2026, there's a cliff of population. We had a recession back in 08 and 09, and the number of 18-year-olds that are going to be available to enter university plummets dramatically. And what that means is in 5 years, every time a washing machine manufacturer wakes up and decides to hire some cloud people to come in and solve their problems, there's fewer and fewer people to actually do this. So I actually think workforce planning is absolutely key as you project out and you want to try and do this on an organic basis. I think the resources will continue to get more scarce. Now, I think one benefit to COVID with people working anywhere will make it easier to employ them and manage them remotely. But at the end of the day, it takes talented, super smart people to go and help us accomplish whatever we set out to do. And there's just fewer and fewer of them, at least in the United States. And we're gonna have to get comfortable on where we're gonna source them, or how we train them internally so that they're with us in 5 years.
Interesting. So get ready for the skill shortage. It feels like there's a skill shortage now. It's going to get worse even in the future. Oh.
That's right.
Well, this is an interesting thing to kind of just a second Jim's point.
Please.
You look at the big tech companies who struggle with the same thing, and they're all moving to skills-based hiring. So there's this sort of unbundling of education, right? Unbundling of the 4-year degree, right? Where you can start to take the time that you have and the money you have to learn enough of the skills that you need to get hired into the job. And that's been a trend that's been kind of coming for about a decade, right? You look at Udemy and Udacity and a range of these different ways of learning things. But for the demand side, right, for Microsoft to say, we're going to focus on skills-based hiring and we're making a big commitment there, that's probably the clarion call for a lot of enterprises to find a different way to solve the problem that Jim just articulated, particularly given the class struggles that we're seeing in the United States, right? Going offshore to find more labor versus focusing on underrepresented communities and places that are struggling and saying, hey, we're going to come and give you the skills you need to get tech jobs. Probably the latter is going to be much more politically palatable, particularly under the Biden-Harris administration, as they need to figure out how to fix the national economy. So I think skills-based hiring is something that should be on every CEO's mind, and certainly CIOs too.
Yeah, because I definitely think we saw the wave of moving to low-cost regions as a path for vendors to hit certain price points, and that can be across many different industries. But I think where we're going with cloud, and one of my favorite definitions of cloud is this notion of self-service, is automation, is standardization. And one of the things that
we might have lost, did we lose Michael? We might have.
You froze up.
He might come back to us at some point. Yeah, it seemed like he was. Jim, in the meantime, were you going to make a comment?
I was. I think what we'll see is, I'm quite involved with my alma mater, and again, it's even pre what I talked about with that cliff there. To be able to spend $100,000 or $200,000 or $250,000 over 4 years to get a degree is cost prohibitive for many parts of our society here. And if you look at a Microsoft and Amazon or Google and everything, you could go out and target high school seniors and actually pay them. Not all that much, pay them, have them earn money to pick up the skill, to put themselves in a position to go out and bank 6 figures in a very short period of time. Whereas you roll the die and, you're out 200,000 to get a degree in whatever it is. That's a very different, much more expensive proposition. And some would suggest that's no longer the natural glide path for many in our society here.
Right. Michael, you froze there in the middle of your point. What were you saying?
So that move to self-service, automation, and standardization of services, that the industry spent too much time making things way too complex, and that this move towards low-code, no-code type approaches, I think that a lot of these things are going to converge. So instead of shipping work, overseas to lower cost regions, I think, we can focus, on reshoring, homeshoring, a lot of these capabilities, but moving up the stack. One of my applications, using a legacy model in cloud, took 80 people to operate. A serverless version of the same thing took 2 people. And so I really do think that, we could be much smarter about the types of work and the types of skills. And, we can upskill, the focus and create a more seamless, experience and a much more efficient environment.
I want to make sure, Michael, that's a good look to the future. Do you have an additional point there? If not, we're all good, but I want to make sure you have your special view to the future. I don't want to miss that.
My special view of the future?
You may have already said, but I'm plumbing the depths here for you, just to make sure I get the LeBeau look.
I definitely wanted to make sure, because the talent question and talent management is going to be, and I think that, most people can, if we teach the world to fish versus, delivering fish dinners, I think that's the biggest shift in terms of the way of work. And so we really do have to be focused on enabling that. And that's going to disrupt the current kind of operating models across the ecosystem. And we have to reflect on that. It's not about, having armies of people. And so that's big. The other thing is, do we have the right set of leaders around the table? I think if I'm a CEO and I'm trying to get to the moon, I need to make sure I've got the right set of vendors, partners, ecosystem, the right set of my own directs on being able to drive that degree of change and focus, and that's not always the case. And so there's no tomorrow in that regard. You have to field the team, and you have to count on that team in order to deliver the results. So when I think about the future, that's how I get positioned in order to take more than my fair share. I deliver a very compelling product at a very reasonable cost, and I drive that into the market.
How is that different in 2025 than it's been for like the last, whatever, 80 years of business, Michael? What would you say differently about,
my question,
actual technology and maybe cloud there?
Right.
Well, I mean, listen, I think as I started, the cloud drives the speed and scale and allows me to do things that I really couldn't do 80 years ago or 20 years ago. We've been on this forced march, for a long time. So we're at a point where the democratization of compute is so vast that if you're not doing it, some upstart in some garage is doing it for you. And when you see kind of isolate the use cases and where the value comes from by combining these technologies, that's the game changer. And so if you didn't have a sense of urgency 5-10 years ago, right, you better have it now, because what you wake up to each morning can be disrupted overnight.
Well, I think that we definitely said it. I mean, we're basically out of time, but I feel like we could probably talk for another 3 hours. We may have only scratched the surface, but I have a feeling some chief executive could sit down and listen to this and go, I feel like I learned something. So Jim, Sam, Michael, I thank you very much for your expertise. I'll send you the link when it's done, and I totally appreciate you being on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us. Happy holidays.
Have a good one. Yeah,
Happy
have a good
holidays.
holiday for sure. Bye-bye.
And Sam, what's the name of your dog?
Please.
Chessie.
Oh, very nice. Very quiet.
She's a miniature golden doodle. She's incredibly zen.
I didn't see her until about halfway through, and then, oh my goodness, then the dog's just passed out sleeping. Look at your dog.
That dog is chill.
She's very chill.
Does she have an opinion about cloud, or she just like bark a lot when it comes to private cloud?
She's pretty copacetic with private cloud.
Oh, good. All right. Well, see you guys later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, folks. See you.
Take care.